Chapter 1. The Shattered Vow. The first thing I did after the impossible happened, after I awoke in a past I thought was long buried, was sever the cord that had strangled my previous life. I would break my engagement to Adrian Thorne. The air in my younger lungs felt strange, thin, yet full of a potential I hadn't tasted in decades. In that other life, the one that ended in a sterile room with the scent of antiseptic and regret, I had poured my entire existence into the vessel that was Adrian. I gave him my youth, my devotion, my unwavering support. And in return, when illness finally claimed me, wasting my body to little more than bone and memory, he was already celebrating his future. He couldn't even grant me the dignity of waiting for my last breath. Behind my back, while I faded, he and Clara were orchestrating a wedding of breathtaking splendor. A celebration that, in a twist of cruel poetry, was scheduled for the very day of my funeral. This time, I refused to be the fool. I would not walk that path of slow, agonizing self-destruction again. While Adrian, in his youthful arrogance, was busy cutting ties with the formidable Thorne family to escape our arranged marriage, running to Clara and her mother like a lapdog seeking a new master, I walked in the opposite direction. My steps were firm, each one a reclamation, as I made my way to the heart of the Thorne estate. The old manor loomed, its stone walls saturated with the history of a powerful family. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of beeswax and old leather. Alastair Thorne, the patriarch, a man whose presence filled any room, sat behind a mahogany desk that had seen generations of deals and decrees. "Elara, my dear," he began, his voice a low rumble that seemed to shake the very dust motes dancing in the afternoon light. "Marrying into the Thorne family was your grandfather's dying wish. It was an agreement between our families, sealed long before you were born." He slid a document across the polished wood. The marriage contract, yellowed with age, felt brittle and heavy in my hands, a relic from a life I was determined to rewrite. I read the words, their ink faded, but their intent still sharp. My eyes scanned the familiar clauses, but this time, my gaze drifted past Adrian's name, past the life of misery it promised, and landed on the man standing silently behind his father, Julian Thorne. A sudden, sharp clarity pierced through the fog of my memories. I lifted my head, my voice clear and steady in the quiet room. "If I must be married in half a month," I said, my finger pointing, my decision absolute, "then I will marry him." The moment the words left my lips, the world seemed to hold its breath. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall became a deafening metronome marking the seconds of a new timeline. Alastair Thorne stared at me, his weathered face a mask of utter shock. "Elara," he said, his voice strained, "marriage is not a game. You and Adrian were promised to each other. You grew up together, inseparable. How can you cast all that aside and choose Julian?" He wasn't wrong. From the earliest days of my childhood, the narrative of my life had been written for me. I would be Adrian's wife. For years, that had been the sun my world orbited. But the sun, I now knew, was a cold, distant star that offered no warmth. He had never loved me. In my past life, Adrian had married me only under the immense pressure of his family. On our wedding night, surrounded by the scent of wilting flowers and the ghost of celebration, his first words to me were not of love, but of condemnation. "Elara," he had sneered, his handsome face twisted with resentment, "since you were so desperate to marry me, prepare for a lifetime of my indifference. I will never love you." Back then, I had believed his heart was a fortress I could eventually breach with patience and love. I was a fool. His indifference never melted. It froze, becoming a glacier that carved a chasm between us. After we married, Clara moved away, becoming a ghost that haunted our home, a saintly martyr in the religion of his regret. Even in our 60s, I would find him in his study, staring at faded love letters he'd penned to her in his youth, silent tears tracing paths through the wrinkles on his cheeks. Just before I died, he had stood over my bed, his face unreadable, and delivered the final, fatal blow. "If it weren't for the promise I made to my grandfather," he said, his voice devoid of any emotion, "I would have divorced you years ago and married Clara. You ruined our lives." It was only then, at the very end, that I understood. He didn't just not love me. He hated me. He despised me so thoroughly that he would celebrate his new life on the day of my death. This time would be different. "Mr. Thorne, I am not joking," I repeated, my resolve hardening into steel. "The agreement states that I am to marry a son of the Thorne family. It does not specify that it must be Adrian, does it?" Julian Thorne was Alistair's youngest son, born late in his father's life, only 5 years Adrian's senior. In my previous existence, he was a peripheral figure. He had left the country after Alistair's passing, and I heard he never married. My memory of him was hazy, a quiet, composed man who carried an air of maturity that Adrian, even in old age, never possessed. He seemed unburdened by the kind of obsessive, unrequited love that had poisoned Adrian's soul. If I had to bind myself in marriage, I would choose a partner who could offer respect, a quiet harbor instead of a tempest. Alistair sighed, a long, weary sound that acknowledged the defeat in my unyielding gaze. "You have a point, Elara, but this decision is not yours alone to make. We must hear what Julian thinks." All eyes turned to the silent man in the background. Julian stood tall, his white shirt pressed to perfection, his posture radiating a calm stillness. I watched as his brow furrowed slightly, a flicker of concern that made my own heart stutter. In my frantic escape from one nightmare, had I carelessly stumbled into creating another? Had I considered his feelings at all? But then, to my profound relief, Julian's voice, smooth and even, broke the silence. "As long as you are certain this is what you want, I have no objections." A broad smile immediately erased the worry from Alistair's face. "Wonderful," he boomed, his good cheer returning. "Then it's settled. The wedding will proceed as planned. Half a month, everything at the Celestial Grand Hotel is already arranged. I told you I won't marry her." Before Alistair could finish, Adrian burst through the study doors, a storm of fury and indignation. He shot me a look of pure contempt before rounding on his grandfather. "Grandfather, this is a new era. These childhood betrothals are nothing but feudal relics. If you force me to marry her instead of Clara, I swear I will leave this family and never return." The very air crackled with his rage, but for the first time in 2 lives, it didn't touch me at all. Chapter 2: The Usurper's Arrival. The scene in the study devolved into a tempest of Adrian's making. Alistair slammed his ornate cane on the hardwood floor, the crack echoing like a gunshot. How many times must I repeat myself? That woman, with a child born out of wedlock, will never have a place in the Thorne family. Do you have any idea of the ridicule I endure from my old comrades because of your scandalous behavior? You are an embarrassing. But Adrian, blinded by his infatuation, heard nothing but an attack on his sainted Clara. "I don't care what anyone says," he roared. "In this life, I will only ever marry Clara. If you don't approve, I'll move into the dorms at the academy and never set foot in this house again." As he stormed toward the door, he paused to sneer at me, his voice a venomous whisper. "You can run to grandfather and cry all you want. It won't change a thing. I will never marry you. You should give up that pathetic dream." He was so certain. He believed I had come here to plead my case, to use his grandfather's authority to chain him to me. The irony was a bitter, private smile on my lips. He had no idea that my greatest wish now was to place an entire ocean between us. "Let him go," Alistair said to the butler who moved to intercept him. The old man took a deep, calming sip of his tea. "He is spoiled beyond redemption. If he wants to sever his ties to this family over that woman, then so be it." True to his word, Adrian moved out of the Thorne estate. At Crestwood Academy, where we both taught, I would often see him fawning over Clara in the cafeteria. A few colleagues, loyal to the idea of our engagement, would whisper their outrage to me. "Elara, it's disgraceful." One of them, a kind woman named Iris, murmured over her lunch tray. It was bad enough that Mr. Thorne used his influence to get Clara that substitute position, but now they're acting like they're already married. Anyone who doesn't know the story would think she's the one he's supposed to marry. I just smiled faintly, a serene, distant expression that offered no purchase for their pity. I continued eating, the taste of the bland cafeteria food a grounding sensation. "What?" Iris pressed, leaning closer. "It doesn't matter," I replied softly, shaking my head. They were no longer my concern. My future was now tied to Julian, and until that bond was formalized, I would not invite any more drama into my life. Adrian and Clara could have each other. They were nothing to me. Since my future was no longer with Adrian, I had no right to remain in the beautiful new house Alistair had prepared for our marriage. He had sympathetically allowed me to live there alone, as it was in a safe, quiet neighborhood close to the academy. With the wedding plans now altered, I knew I had to move out. But when I returned to the house to pack my belongings, a chilling sight greeted me. My life, my books, my clothes, my personal treasures was unceremoniously dumped in the dusty hallway. Clara Reed stood in the doorway, her arms crossed over a garish floral print dress. Her posture was one of triumphant ownership, the self-appointed hostess of a home she had no claim to. "Miss Vance, you're back," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "I am so sorry about this. Adrian insisted I move in with my daughter. There simply wasn't enough space for everything, so I had to put your things out here for the time being." She gestured vaguely at the apartment block around them. "You know how cramped these places can be. Adrian couldn't bear to see us struggling, so he asked you to leave. I do hope it's not too much of an inconvenience." In my previous life, this exact moment had shattered me. The violation of my home, the blatant replacement of me by her, had sent me into a spiral of grief and rage. I had screamed, I had cried, I had demanded an explanation from Adrian, who had only met my pain with a cold, mocking laugh. "We're not even married yet," he'd said. "What right do you have to dictate who lives in a Thorne family property?" This time, there was no pain, only a profound, weary numbness. Without a word, I knelt and began to quietly gather my things, sorting them into the boxes I had brought. My silence seemed to unnerve Clara more than any outburst could have. "You're not jealous?" she asked, a sliver of disbelief in her tone. "Aren't you afraid Adrian will marry me instead of you now?" I looked up, my gaze as cold and clear as winter ice. "A scoundrel and a stray," I said, my voice low and even. "A match made in heaven." Clara's face flushed a blotchy, furious red. Tears of indignation sprang to her eyes. "Who are you calling a stray?" she shrieked. Right on cue, Adrian appeared. Seeing Clara's tears, he immediately leaped to her defense, his face a mask of righteous anger. "Elara, all she did was ask you to move out for a little while. Did you have to bully her? Or are you just so desperate to get your hands on the Thorne family's money that you can't stand losing your meal ticket?" His arrogance was a monument to his own self-delusion. Once Adrian Thorne made up his mind about something, no force on earth could sway him. I had no desire to waste another breath, another second of my precious new life entangled in their sordid drama. I turned and walked away. "Elara Vance!" I could hear him shouting behind me, his voice sharp with a vindictive certainty. "A woman like you will never marry me. Don't even dream of it. I won't be at that wedding in half a month. You can count on being the most humiliated bride this city has ever seen." I didn't look back. He had no idea how fervently I prayed his promise would come true. Chapter 3. The Poisoned Pen. After retreating to the sparse but clean employee dormitory, I erected a wall of silence between myself and the chaotic world of Adrian and Clara. Yet the academy was a small universe, and rumors were the air everyone breathed. Whispers followed me down the corridors like ghosts, and the pitying stares of my colleagues were a constant, unwelcome companion. I could feel their thoughts. Poor Elara, so devoted, so cruelly cast aside. They didn't understand that I felt not loss, but liberation. A week later, that fragile peace was shattered. The principal summoned me to his office. He was a good man, but today his face was etched with a gravity that turned my stomach to ice. He gestured to a formal letter lying on his desk, its official letterhead seeming to radiate a cold authority. "Miss Vance," he began, his voice heavy with reluctance, "a report has been filed. It accuses you of plagiarism during the recent teacher's writing competition." He sighed, running a hand through his thinning hair. "This is a very serious allegation, and the district office is paying close attention." The accusation was a bolt from the blue, stunning me into silence. "Principal," I finally managed, my voice trembling slightly, "every word in that article was my own. How could it possibly be plagiarism? And who did they say I plagiarized?" He looked genuinely frustrated. The accuser provided extensive evidence, drafts, outlines, notes. Even if I wanted to make this disappear, my hands are tied. I think it would be best for you to take a few days off while the board investigates." The words struck me like a physical blow. I stumbled out of his office in a daze, my mind reeling. And there, standing by the hallway window, bathed in a sliver of sunlight, was Clara. A smug, triumphant smile curled her lips. In that single, sickening instant, everything clicked into place. Most of my personal effects, including my writing journals and drafts, had been left behind in the house. There was only one person who could have stolen them. "It was you," I whispered, the words barely audible. I stared at her, the cold fury beginning to burn through my shock. Clara didn't bother with denial. Seeing that we were alone, she let her smirk widen. "Yes, it was me. So what?" she said. "You should have been more careful with your things. You left them lying around for anyone to take." My hands began to tremble, not with fear, but with a rage so profound it felt like it could tear me apart. My reaction only seemed to delight her further. "Elara, you took my man, so I'm taking your job. It's only fair," she continued, her eyes gleaming with malice. "If you don't leave Crestwood, how am I supposed to move up from a substitute to a full-time position?" So that was her endgame. Before I could form a response, the principal called her into his office. I was left standing alone in the hallway, the injustice of it all a bitter taste in my mouth. I filed an appeal, of course, but it was a futile gesture. "We already have definitive proof that your submission plagiarized an original work," the district official told me over the phone, his voice bored and dismissive. "All you can do is wait for the board's decision." The decision came swiftly. I was fired. The principal, in a moment of private sympathy, told me that if it weren't for my exemplary record, they would have made a public spectacle of me. How utterly laughable. The true author was cast out in disgrace, while the thief was celebrated and promoted. That very evening,
Adrian threw a lavish dinner party at a downtown restaurant to celebrate Clara's promotion. I wasn't invited, but I went anyway. I walked into the private room, the sounds of laughter and clinking glasses falling silence as all eyes turned to me. I walked directly to the table, picked up a glass of deep red wine, and with a slow, deliberate motion, inverted it over Clara's head. Gasps filled the room. The wine streamed down her hair and face, staining her white dress like blood. Before anyone could react, Adrian leaped to his feet, grabbing my arm in a painfully tight grip and dragging me out of the restaurant and onto the cold street. Elara Vance, are you insane? It's just a teaching position. Clara is a single mother. Do you have any idea how difficult her life is? Can't you just let her have this one thing? If you have any hope of marrying me, you need to stop making things so difficult for her. His words confirmed my suspicion. He knew. He knew all along that I was the one who had been wronged. It was even likely that he had helped Clara forge the evidence. Without a second thought, my hand flew up and I slapped him hard across the face. The sound was sharp and final in the night air.
Adrian Thorne, I said, my voice shaking with a cold, clear rage. You make me sick, and don't you worry, I wouldn't marry you if you were the last man on earth. He, however, dismissed my declaration as nothing more than the bitter tantrum of a scorned woman. In his mind, my devotion was an unshakable fact of nature. He was so certain I could never truly let him go. He was about to learn just how wrong he was. Chapter 4: The Wedding Guest. I never thought Adrian would admit fault, let alone apologize for anything. Yet, 3 days later, he did the unthinkable. He showed up at the crumbling tenement block where I'd found a small, dreary apartment after being fired. He stood awkwardly in the bustling, noisy courtyard, looking utterly out of place in his expensive clothes. "Elara," he began, unable to meet my eyes. "Clara, she just wanted to secure her position at the academy so badly. She acted impulsively when she took your drafts. I'm here to apologize on her behalf." He was apologizing, but it was for another woman, and his apology was merely a prelude to an even more audacious request. "Someone reported Clara for getting her promotion through improper connections," he continued, a note of desperation creeping into his voice. "I admitted to pulling some strings to get her the substitute job, but the plagiarism charge is more serious. Elara, her ability is more than enough to hold the position, isn't it?" "Her ability," I scoffed, my voice dripping with ice. "You mean her ability to accept bribes from wealthy parents, or her talent for turning a blind eye to the bullying perpetrated by the children of the school's benefactors?" I fell silent, simply staring at him, letting the weight of his hypocrisy hang in the air between us. He finally broke, his plea tumbling out in a rush. "If you come forward and testify that Clara wrote that article, that you were the one who plagiarized it, she'll be able to keep her job." The shamelessness of it took my breath away. He was asking me to destroy my own reputation to save the woman who had ruined me. "Get out," I said, turning my face away, unwilling to even look at him. My wedding to Julian was only 2 days away. I had a new life to prepare for, a future to build. I had no more time to waste on the ghosts of my past. My refusal seemed to wound his pride. "It was you who reported her, wasn't it?" he accused, his voice turning nasty. "You're such a despicable, petty woman, Elara Vance. Let me tell you something. If you help her this one time, I'll agree to marry you. You'd better think about that offer very carefully." To him, marrying me was a grand prize, a charitable act he could bestow upon me. Unfortunately for him, the prize was worthless. The next day, my friend Iris insisted on taking me out for a celebratory meal. You know how they have bachelorette parties in other countries, she said cheerfully. Let's give you a proper send-off. I couldn't refuse her kindness. At the restaurant, while heading to the restroom, I passed a private room with the door slightly ajar. A familiar, boastful voice drifted out. It was Adrian's. If it weren't for Clara, he was saying, I'd never agree to marry that woman. Just looking at her makes me sick. I peeked through the crack in the door. He had his arm draped around Clara, his friends laughing and cheering him on. He was speaking with a sickening, alcohol-fueled devotion. Don't you worry, he murmured to Clara, loud enough for everyone to hear. I'll never love anyone but you. Marrying her tomorrow is just a performance to appease my grandfather and to keep you secure at the academy. Clara blushed and leaned against him, the picture of shy adoration. For a moment, a sharp, familiar sting of betrayal pierced through my carefully composure. I thought I was immune to him, but hearing him belittle me so casually still hurt. This was the Adrian I remembered, arrogant, foolish, and utterly blind. How had I wasted decades of my life on such a man? A bitter smile touched my lips. I whispered to the empty hallway, a promise to myself. Adrian, your presence at tomorrow's wedding will not be required. The next day, my wedding to Julian proceeded as planned. The grand ballroom of the Celestial Grand Hotel was filled with flowers and soft music. As I walked down the aisle, a sea of startled faces turned to watch. They saw me, the bride, but standing at the altar was not the groom they expected. The prestige of the Thorne family, however, was a powerful deterrent to gossip. Their confusion was quickly masked by polite smiles and whispered congratulations. As Julian and I made our rounds, toasting our guests, a commotion near the entrance drew everyone's attention. Adrian had arrived, fashionably late, and on his arm was Clara, draped in a floor-length red dress that was shockingly similar to a bride's gown. It was an echo of my past. Back then, Adrian had deliberately vanished on our wedding day, leaving me alone at the altar, a public spectacle of humiliation. He had eventually appeared with Clara, dressed in a similar act of defiance. I had swallowed my pain and gone through with the ceremony. But this was not that life. This time was different. Adrian's drunken swagger faltered as he saw Julian standing beside him, wearing the groom's tuxedo. His expression froze, shock warring with confusion. "Uncle Julian," he slurred, "why are you wearing a groom's suit?" Julian simply raised an eyebrow, his calm unshaken. "Because I am the groom," he replied, his voice level. "Whereas you reek of alcohol and are still in yesterday's clothes. What kind of impression are you hoping to make?" Adrian's eyes widened, the color draining from his face. "What's going on? Isn't today my wedding day?" Alistair, who had been watching from his seat of honor, let out a cold chuckle. He slammed his cane on the floor. "You didn't want to get married, did you not? Well, boy, you've gotten your wish. So what are you complaining about?" Adrian shook his head, turning on me with renewed fury. "Elara Vance, did you say something to them? Did you pull some kind of trick? I knew you couldn't be trusted." Before I could utter a single word, Julian stepped forward, placing himself protectively in front of me. His voice was quiet, but it carried an unyielding authority that silenced the room. "Elara Vance is not someone you can address so casually. Based on seniority, you will now call her Aunt." Chapter 5. A New Beginning. Adrian stumbled back as if struck, nearly knocking Clara off her feet. The word aunt hung in the air, a final, definitive severing of the ties that had once bound us. Clara, however, saw opportunity in the chaos. Her face lit up with a greedy, hopeful light. "Adrian, this is wonderful," she exclaimed, clinging to his arm. "If your grandfather isn't forcing you to marry Elara, then we can finally be together. We can get married." Her words were a desperate, public declaration of her ambition to claw her way into the Thorne family. Before she could continue her triumphant speech, Alistair snorted with derision.
"Not just anyone can marry into this family," he said. "And as for you, young lady, if you think you can bring a woman of your character into my house, it will happen over my dead body." The public humiliation was too much for Clara. Her face crumpled, and thick tears began to stream down her cheeks. She bit her lip, turned, and fled the ballroom, covering her face with her hands. Only then did Adrian seem to snap out of his stupor. He rounded on his grandfather, his voice trembling with outrage. "Why didn't anyone tell me the groom had been changed? Why wasn't I informed?" Alistair's glare was glacial. "I called your school multiple times, but you refused to take my calls, assuming I was trying to force you to the wedding. I even sent registered letters to your dormitory. You returned every single one unopened." Adrian's face turned a ghostly pale as the truth of his own foolishness crashed down upon him. He stood frozen for a long moment, then with a final defeated look, he turned and chased after Clara. The rest of the wedding proceeded in a haze of surreal peace. That evening, in the quiet of our new bedroom, I sat on the edge of the bed, the crimson silk of the sheets cool against my skin. There was a question that had been lingering in the back of my mind. "Was it you?" I asked Julian, who was loosening his tie by the window. "The one who reported Clara to the district office? It had to be. No one else had the influence to ensure her swift removal." He turned, and in the soft lamplight I saw him nod. His expression was calm, his gaze direct. "You married me, Elara. I will not allow you to be wronged." He paused, then added, "I have also spoken to the school. If you wish to return to teaching, your position is waiting for you."
His quiet support was a balm to wounds I hadn't realized were still so raw. A warmth spread through my chest, chasing away the last of the shadows. But this time, I hesitated. In my past life, I had worked at Crestwood until my retirement, but I had never truly loved it. It had been a job, a duty, not a passion. "I think I'd like to try applying to a newspaper," I confessed, voicing a dream I had long since buried. "The Valorian Chronicle is hiring." I worried he might disapprove, that, like so many men of his time, he would prefer his wife not to work in such a public-facing role. To my surprise, he simply smiled, a small, genuine smile that reached his eyes. "Do whatever you like," he said. "If it's what makes you happy, then go for it. And if it doesn't work out, I am here for you." Encouraged by his words, the very next day I carefully slipped my prepared manuscript, a portfolio of my best writing, into the narrow slot of a public mailbox. If it was accepted, it would give me a significant advantage in the interview process. As I walked home, feeling a sense of hope I hadn't felt in years, I passed a department store. I suddenly remembered that Julian seemed to own an endless supply of identical white shirts. On an impulse, I went inside, deciding to buy him some fine fabric in a deep, calming blue. To my utter dismay, I ran into Adrian and Clara at the fabric counter. She was clinging to his arm, pointing a perfectly manicured finger at the very bolt of blue fabric I had just chosen. "This one," she told the shop assistant with an air of command. "Wrap it up for me." My good mood instantly evaporated. The beautiful fabric I had just admired now seemed dull and tainted. I quietly slipped the fabric coupon back into my pocket and turned to the shop assistant with a polite, cool smile. "Give it to her," I said, my voice carrying just enough for Clara and Adrian to hear. Some people simply enjoy having what others no longer want. Clara bristled, her back straightening in offense. "Don't you act so high and mighty. You didn't seem so dignified when you were chasing after Adrian like a lovesick puppy." I glanced at Adrian, looking him up and down with a faint, dismissive smirk. Charming, isn't he? Adrian, who had been silent, suddenly looked grim. "Elara, don't think you're so special just because you married my uncle," he snapped. "You only managed that because of some dusty old contract. Clara is different. She loves me for who I am, not for my family's money." I noticed a flicker of something,
Awkwardness, perhaps guilt, crossed Clara's face, but she quickly masked it, leaning sweetly against Adrian's shoulder as if he were the center of the universe. "You know, we should really thank you, Elara," she cooed. "Without you, Adrian and I would never have been able to be together. We're family now. When the baby arrives, you simply must come to the celebration." She gently placed a hand on her stomach, her expression glowing with a mock maternal radiance. She was trying to provoke me, to flaunt her supposed victory. It was transparently clear she hoped to use this baby as a key to unlock the Thorne family vault. I couldn't help but sneer. And here I thought a leopard couldn't change its spots. "Is having a child out of wedlock something to be proud of now?" I said. "A few years ago, the both of you would have been ostracized for this." With that, I walked past them, leaving them standing in stunned, furious silence. Chapter 6. The Unraveling. It didn't take long for Adrian, emboldened by Clara's pregnancy, to begin pestering Alistair again. He pleaded, he argued, he demanded that his grandfather allow him to marry her. "I have already given you my answer," Alistair roared, his anger making him short of breath. "As long as I draw breath, that woman will never set foot in this house as a Thorne." Adrian, stubborn as ever, pushed back. "Grandfather, times have changed. People believe in free love now. Besides, Clara is carrying my child. That baby is your great-grandchild, a member of this family." This only fueled the old man's fury. "A child conceived in shame is nothing but a bastard," he thundered, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. His rage boiled over, and he struck Adrian's leg hard with his cane. "If you are so determined to marry that harlot, then get out of my house and never come back." Adrian was officially cast out. He and Clara held a small, pathetic wedding in the house that was once meant for me. The only guests were a handful of his sycophantic drinking buddies. Adrian had always basked in the deference people showed him as a Thorne heir. Now, stripped of his family name, he found the world to be a much colder place. People stopped treating him with the same fawning respect. Even Clara's adoration quickly soured into incessant complaints. "How can you call yourself a man?" she would nag. "Your meager teacher's salary can't even buy a decent dress." Soon enough, Adrian came crawling back to the Thorne estate, begging for forgiveness. But Alistair was a man of his word. He sent a message via a security guard. "You may return with the child, but that woman will never pass through these gates." Adrian was officially cast out. He and Clara held a small, pathetic wedding in the house that was once meant for me. The only guests were a handful of his sycophantic drinking buddies. Adrian had always basked in the deference people showed him as a Thorne heir. Now, stripped of his family name, he found the world to be a much colder place. People stopped treating him with the same fawning respect. Even Clara's adoration quickly soured into incessant complaints. "How can you call yourself a man?" she would nag. "Your meager teacher's salary can't even buy a decent dress." Soon enough, Adrian came crawling back to the Thorne estate, begging for forgiveness. But Alistair was a man of his word. He sent a message via a security guard. "You may return with the child, but that woman will never pass through these gates." Adrian was left standing outside the home he grew up in, not permitted to take even a single step inside. Meanwhile, my own life was blossoming. I received a letter from the Valorian Chronicle. I had been hired. I would start work next month. Without the suffocating presence of Adrian, the world felt brighter, freer, filled with possibility. One evening after work, as I walked home, I overheard some former colleagues gossiping in hushed, excited tones. "Have you heard? That Thorne grandson, the one who taught at Crestwood, he got cheated on." "Yes, I heard. The man was the principal from the school next door. They were caught in bed together. They say when the wife caught them, neither Clara nor the principal had any clothes on." I couldn't suppress a small, grim smile. It seemed karma had finally decided to pay a visit. Such a scandal, in an era where entertainment was scarce, spread like wildfire. The principal's wife, a notoriously fiery woman, had not only caught them, but had proceeded to sit on the floor of the hallway and wail at the top of her lungs, ensuring every neighbor heard every sordid detail. Clara's affair was a desperate, calculated move to secure a pass back into a teaching career. Adrian's salary could barely support her and her existing daughter, let alone a new baby. The principal was promptly fired for inappropriate relationships. Clara, being pregnant and unemployed, was let off with a stern warning. But the principal's wife was far from finished. She took her vengeance directly to Adrian's doorstep, throwing buckets of filth at his door and employing every humiliating tactic she could imagine. The public shame, piled on top of the private betrayal, was more than Adrian could bear. He finally broke. He knelt before Adrian Thorne, his pride shattered into a million pieces. "Grandpa," he choked out, his head bowed. "I was wrong." Though still furious, Alistair couldn't completely abandon his grandson. Adrian was allowed back into the family, though the atmosphere in the house became thick with an unspoken tension that made my own visits deeply uncomfortable. "Elara," Adrian said to me one afternoon, finding me alone in the garden. His voice was awkward, filled with a regret I never thought him capable of. In my memory, Adrian had always been impossibly proud, self-assured, even into old age. The man standing before me seemed to have aged a decade in a matter of weeks, his shoulders hunched under the invisible weight of rumor and humiliation. "It's all in the past," I said lightly, my tone devoid of emotion. There was a time I might have hated him, but now, standing beside Julian, doing work that I love, and watching Adrian reap the bitter harvest he had sown, I realized I no longer cared enough to hate him. You only hate the things that still hold a piece of your heart. Indifference had replaced that fire. "Elara," he hesitated, then plunged ahead. "I know there's no real affection between you and my uncle. The mistakes I made, let's fix them. You and we were supposed to be together. If you're willing to divorce him, I cut him off, my voice sharp. "Do you think I am an object you can simply discard at your convenience? How pathetic. That only after being publicly abandoned and humiliated, you finally remember my worth?" I looked him directly in the eye, my gaze firm. I turned and walked away, not sparing him another glance. It was time to talk to Julian about moving out. Living under the same roof as my ex-fiancé was untenable. As I rounded the corner of the house, a pair of strong arms suddenly pulled me into a warm, secure embrace. It was Julian. "We'll move out," he said firmly. I didn't know how long he had been standing there, listening, but his tone was resolute. I looked up at him, a teasing smile playing on my lips. "Are you jealous?" He didn't reply, but I saw the tips of his ears turn a faint, charming shade of red. Chapter 7. The Final Confrontation. Alistair understood our need for our own space, and the move went smoothly. But just as we were packing the last of our boxes, an unwelcome drama unfolded at the Thorne estate's main gates. "Adrian Thorne, get out here!" Clara's voice, shrill and piercing, echoed across the manicured lawns. Her stomach was noticeably round now, her floral dress straining against her swollen figure. She looked frantic, her hair disheveled. "You are responsible for this baby," she shrieked at the closed gates, her tone a mix of accusation and desperation. "You left me out here, alone and pregnant. Have you no shame? If you don't come out, I'll report you for abandonment. I'll barge in if I have to. Let's see who dares stop a pregnant woman." The security guards exchanged troubled looks, but held their ground. Just as Clara was winding up for another tirade, Adrian finally appeared, his face flushed with a dark, furious anger. "You dare show your face here?" he snarled. "After you've been disgracing yourself all over the city, you have the nerve to come to my family's home?"
His rage was barely contained. Disgrace myself? Clara shot back, her voice just as venomous. Everything I did for our future. Do you think I would have stayed with you if you weren't a thorn? You're nothing. You're trash that was cast out by your own family. How are we supposed to survive on your pathetic salary? Should we starve? Adrian seemed stunned, as if he were seeing her true colors for the very first time. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. I watched the ugly scene for a moment, but quickly lost interest. Their toxic back and forth was pathetic, and I had a new life to build. As I turned to leave, Clara darted toward me, grabbing my arm in a surprisingly strong grip. "Elara Vance, this is all you're doing, isn't it?" she hissed, her nails digging into my skin. "You're the reason Alistair won't let me into the family." I tried to shake her off, glancing around for Julian, but he was inside the house. A sliver of panic crept up my spine. "What are you talking about? Let go of me," I demanded. She ignored me, her face contorted with hate. "Seeing me like this makes you happy, doesn't it? Just because you married Julian doesn't make you any better than me. We're both just women who use men to climb in the world. If I'm going to be miserable, I'll make sure you don't have it easy either." With a final, hateful glare, she shoved me, hard. Whether it was intentional or not, I lost my balance. I stumbled backward, and my head connected with the sharp edge of a stone garden planter. Darkness consumed my vision. Chapter 8: A New Life. When I opened my eyes, the first thing I saw was Julian's face, etched with a guilt so profound it seemed to have aged him. His normally smooth-shaven chin was covered in dark stubble, and the exhaustion in his eyes told me he hadn't slept. The sterile white room smelled of disinfectant, a hospital. "Elara, you're awake," he breathed, his voice thick with relief and sorrow. "I am so sorry. I should have protected you. I swear I will never let anything happen to you again. Are you in pain? Does your head still hurt?" I had never heard him speak so much at once. A faint smile touched my lips. I tried to sit up, shaking my head slightly, and he was instantly on his feet, fumbling to adjust my pillow, handing me a glass of water, tucking the blanket around me with an awkward tenderness. Watching him so flustered, I couldn't resist a small tease. "I just fell," I whispered, my voice hoarse. "It's no big deal. The worst I'll have is a scar." A deep red flush spread across Julian's face. He hesitated, then finally stammered, You need to take care of yourself. You're about to become a mother." For a moment, the world stopped. I thought I'd misheard him. My heart began to pound against my ribs, a frantic, joyful rhythm. "What did you say? Are you serious? We're having a baby." He nodded, over and over, his expression softening into a gentle, overwhelming joy. The realization washed over me. I was pregnant. For the first time in 2 lifetimes, I was going to be a mother. Happiness, pure and surreal, surged through me, so intense it brought tears to my eyes. That blissful moment was interrupted by a knock at the door. "Uncle Julian, I need to talk to her." It was Adrian. Julian looked at me, a silent question in his eyes. I gave him a reassuring nod, and he reluctantly left the room. "Elara, I'm sorry," Adrian said. "I never imagined she would hurt you." I stayed silent, watching him. "I know, I've done so much to hurt you," he continued, rambling. "These past few days, I've been thinking about us, about everything. I finally realized what I lost, but it's too late now, isn't it?" His words barely registered. I had already said my piece, and now, carrying Julian's child, the past felt more distant than ever. I knew his visit wasn't just for an apology. Seeing my silence, he finally revealed his true purpose. "I know you can't forgive me," he said, his voice dropping to a desperate plea. "But I'm begging you, please help Clara. Grandpa is furious.
Her life is going to be ruined, but she's pregnant with my child. That baby is a thorn. Please, Elara, I'm asking you to talk to Grandpa on her behalf." Looking at his pain-etched face, I felt a flicker of something akin to pity. He hadn't just been betrayed, he'd been made a fool of. But my sympathy had its limits. I let out a soft, faint chuckle. A flicker of hope lit his eyes, but my next words extinguished it completely. "Since you are my nephew," I said, my voice calm and deliberate, "I'll offer you a piece of advice as an elder. You should get a paternity test, and if that's not possible, perhaps you should have your own health check." I paused, remembering a cold, clinical conversation from my previous life. Despite our loveless marriage, Adrian and I were a husband and wife, yet we never had children. The issue had not been with me. It had been with him. He was infertile. When I had learned of Clara's pregnancy back then, I knew instantly he had been deceived. In that life, I had stayed silent. But now, after she had put my own child at risk, I saw no reason to protect her secret. Adrian's eyes widened in disbelief. He stammered, demanding to know why I would say such a thing. At first, he dismissed it as a cruel lie, but the more he pressed, and the more I refused to elaborate, the more shaken he became. The seed of doubt had been planted. Eventually, he lost all composure and ran from the room like a man pursued by demons. Epilogue: Ashes and Blooms. The next time I heard Adrian's name, it was in a stark black and white headline in the Valleorian Chronicle. He had killed Clara in the very house that was once meant to be ours. Then he had lit a charcoal brazier and laid down beside her. By the time they were discovered, it was too late. I later learned that when he confronted her, she had screamed the truth of his infertility for the entire neighborhood to hear. Within days, the scandal had ripped through the city. Adrian, unable to endure the final, crushing humiliation, had chosen to end both their lives. Alistair, forced to bury his grandson, seemed to shrink overnight, the grief carving new, deeper lines into his face. We asked him to come live with us so we could care for him, but he refused. "It is enough," he said, "for you to visit when you can." "And then, my little sparrow," I said, my voice growing soft as I finished the story, "Grandpa called us to dinner." My granddaughter, her pigtails bouncing against her shoulders, tilted her head and looked up at me with wide, curious eyes. Before she could ask another question, a warm voice called out from the kitchen. "Stop telling stories and come and eat. I made your favorite sweet and sour fish." I smiled, brushing a hand gently against my granddaughter's soft cheek. I took her tiny hand in mine, and together we walked toward the living room. There, standing by the dining table, was Julian, holding a platter of glistening fish, a warm, loving smile on his face. This was my life now. Not the one I had been given, but the one I had chosen. And it was more beautiful than anything I could have ever dreamed.